First, good news. The United States announced President Obama this week will not develop new nuclear warheads. Well, it's about time. We'll hear more about the administration's new nuclear posture review in just a minute with David Corn. But just one thing, reducing stockpiles, narrowing the stated purpose of nuclear weapons, that's all great. But the U.S., it seems to me, is still reserving the right to use nukes against nuclear proliferators and scofflaws. That's kind of like killing people to show that killing people is wrong, isn't it? There's always people and the pressure of non-governmental agencies if nuclear non-proliferation enforcement doesn't work. But if nuclear non-proliferation enforcement works like mine safety enforcement, I'm not reassured. And if that FCC decision holds, well, cable news companies may be able to stop any of us finding out about anything that non-government agencies are doing. We'll talk about all that and more coming up in the program. First, this is what was screened at the White House Tuesday night, right after releasing that nuclear posture review. Take a look.
The world has changed since the end of the Cold War. More countries have nuclear weapons and others are attempting to develop nuclear weapons capabilities. The world needs energy, and that has many countries understandably turning to nuclear power, which, unless safely and securely managed, could also spread sensitive technologies to make the materials essential to a nuclear bomb. The simple fact is, we need new strategies to deal with today's nuclear threats.
If you can learn how to enrich fuel for a nuclear power plant, you've learned how to enrich it for a weapon.
We cannot uninvent nuclear weapons. We cannot repeal E equals MC squared.
Well, that's what they were watching at the White House Tuesday night, a documentary, The Nuclear Tipping Point. Does it suggest that the administration thinks its own nuclear posture review brings us to some kind of a new tipping point? Let's find out. We've got Mother Jones's Washington Bureau Chief David Corn on the line. Hi, David. Welcome to GRITtv.
Good to be with you, Laura.
Tipping point, is it? Are we experiencing a tip right now?
Well, I don't know if we're experiencing a tip in terms of what's happening in the external world with nuclear weapons. I mean, there's been a long drive on the part of many countries to develop atomic weapons and hydrogen bombs and such. And by and large, it hasn't been much of a political issue since those heady days of the nuclear weapons freeze back in the early 1980s. So it's, in some ways, been encouraging that the White House under Barack Obama is indeed putting some priority, putting some emphasis to dealing with the issues of nuclear non-proliferation and nuclear security, meaning dealing with loose nukes or the possibility of loose nukes, and also dealing with with another issue, which is accidental nuclear war.
So thumbs up for addressing it at all, but what about what's in the posture review? What isn't?
Well, the Nuclear Posture Review is a document that comes out every, 10 years or so. I think the last one was in 2001, and there was one in 1994, in which an administration basically says, here are our guidelines for our nuclear weapons policy. And so Obama put one out, and the arms control community here in Washington is, I would say, the way to put it is mildly impressed. It didn't go as far as many of them wanted to see. It wasn't as bold a shift in paradigm as they hoped for. But it, you mentioned earlier, did do a few things. It said we're not going to be developing nuclear weapons, and a lot of neoconservatives hate that. It didn't take nuclear weapons off what's known as alert status, something that Barack Obama called for during the campaign, but it moved in that direction. It didn't have the United States make an outright statement that it will never use nuclear weapons first in any conflict. A lot of arms control advocates want to see a no first use declaration as a way of encouraging other countries to get serious about non-proliferation. But again, it sort of nodded in that direction, and it said it would not use nuclear weapons against countries that didn't have them, but it left a loophole. If you were not, according to the United States, abiding by the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, then we might indeed use them. And a lot of this is also, is somewhat, it's talk. It's important talk. But, the notion of whether, say we might use a nuclear weapon in a certain conflict is really much different than the issue of whether we actually would.
Switching topics, a federal court made a decision this week that affects all of our access to the internet. It was a big win for Comcast. You were at the press conference, David, and you raised an important question. Take a look.
We have not had an opportunity to fully evaluate the FCC's decision, the decision affecting the FCC, which, as you know, is an independent agency.
Does the administration broadly support the notion of net neutrality?
It does. Right? It does. And the president discussed that, obviously, in the campaign. We're committed to that and committed to providing businesses with the certainty that they need as well.
The presidential position clarified there for net neutrality, and yet this federal decision seems to go the other way. What do you think happens next, and what are the implications of that FCC decision, or the decision regarding the FCC?
Well, it sets up a big fight, which I'm told could go all the way up to the Supreme Court, which is kind of a scary prospect at this point in time. The affirmation that Robert Gibbs gave me yesterday was, that they support net neutrality. It wasn't perhaps as emphatic as some advocates would have liked to have heard, but the words were there. And I suppose, there are legislative ways, as there almost always are, to deal with, bad court decisions. So the administration, may have, if they continue to lose in the courts here, and they're serious about net neutrality, they may have to sort of make this an issue up on Capitol Hill, which would again turn into one of those, pretty big fights between, the small guys and gals and the big guys and big gals, with a lot of lobbying and a lot of money flowing into this. So, this could really tee up a major titanic battle that will take probably a couple of years to play out.
All right, David, thank you so much for joining us. We've got more on the FCC decision, or the decision about the FCC, coming up later in the program. David Korn of Mother Jones. You can find out more about his work and links to his writing at our website, GRITtv.org. Stay tuned.